me do the introductions then. We're happy to have our students in this webinar. This is a first webinar of a series of webinars between INSEEC Grande École Research Center and George Mason University in the United States, in the Washington metropolitan area, in Fairfax, in fact, George Mason University. I'm proud to say that I have spent a few months at George Mason University, where I had the pleasure to meet Jean-Pierre Offray. He will introduce himself. He has a worldwide presence in everything that's technology in companies' administrations. Sam is his colleague of George Mason, I suppose. I'm glad to get to know him today, but I will also would like to introduce Caroline. Caroline Ganscombe is our AI geek. Whenever we have AI questions, AI problems, this is where we go at INSEEC Grande École. This session is dedicated. AI is everywhere. It's ruling our world. It's ruling our news. It's ruling everything we are, everything what companies are, whenever companies are thinking of future, whenever administrations are thinking of the future, AI is top of the list. But is it ruling our world or is it ruling our worlds? There is a perception that there are two worlds, the United States and Europe. The United States, where rules are lighter and companies can invest more freely, can take more risks, can be more innovative, or the European approach, which is more conservative, more regulated. Are we living in two different worlds, or are we living in one world but different perspectives? This is what I will let our colleagues talk about during this webinar. So, Jean-Pierre, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you, Pierre. Very nice to see you again, and fantastic to be doing this series with INSEEC Grande École and you and Carolyn and Catherine and Hashmi. So with that, if you can please introduce Carolyn, and we'll go ahead.
Okay, so I'm Caroline Ganscombe. I'm an associate professor at INSEEC Grande École. I'm also a research fellow. I'm working on data ethics, AI, and specifically working on giving value to values, which is the way to evaluate AI within the value framework question. I've been working for the Commission, also European Commission. I'm an expert with the Commission. I'm an expert with OECD, specifically on AI. I'm also a speaker at AI for Good. So, and if you want to have more, well, feel free to go on LinkedIn, because everything is there, including my CV. So I'm not going to take time discussing my profile, but I'm going to quickly jump to the topic, which is, well, we do have two visions of the world, actually what Pierre said, which is what can I say, risk-centric, which is more Europe, and more well, sort of a more liberal approach, which is what is in the United States. Well, those two visions, they do have some similarities, but we're not going to focus on similarities today. We're going to focus on differences. First thing first, what you need to read in order to have a vision of what we're going to talk today is a very, very seminal paper by Floridi in 2018, where they said AI for the people, an ethical framework for good AI society, which is virtually where all the questions and the different frameworks were set. What was said there is that, well, AI is going to provide a number of benefits, of course, but those benefits come with some sort of very substantial risk. And then the analysis of the risk are different on the different side of the Atlantic. I'm going to focus on European Union. And well, the European Union has said, okay, you have risk interesting, they're good, but you need to mitigate them so that people in the end will adhere to the process and will use AI. In order to do so, there was a long-standing process about data and then about AI. Data led to GDPR, and which is the General Data Protection Regulation, and AI led to the AI Act that was enabled last summer in 24. One important aspect is that, of course, by giving this priority to risk, the European Union also provides some sort of focus on human dignity, the rights, fundamental rights, the different democratic value that are behind, or democratic values that are fostering and behind innovation. So what I'm going to focus on today is this European risk-centered approach about AI governance, and I'm going to try to demonstrate that there is this approach, risk-centered approach, is not a barrier to innovation, but a sort of foundation for some sort of trustworthy and sustainable AI and technological advancements more generally. So what is this famous European risk-based framework? By the way, if you do have questions, put them in the chat and we can discuss at the end of the presentation. So well, this risk-based framework was adopted so in 2024. It's a sort of attempt to regulate AI through some sort of risk-centered or risk-based taxonomy. So you've got 4 levels of risk: minimal risk, limited risk, high risk, and unacceptable risk. Of course, we're not going to deploy something which is unacceptable. And behind this, you have something that I particularly like, which is called the Brussels effect. So if you want to know what's the Brussels effect, you need to read Bradford. But I'm providing at the end of the session, I will provide you with a list of all the different references I'm going to quote, so that you will have all the needed information. So what is the Brussels effect? The Brussels effect is that, in a way, and though nobody agrees about that, when a norm is implemented in the EU, by the EU and in the EU, well, it's sort of, because it's very high standard and it's normally very well written, normally it becomes a sort of diplomatic policy tool, and it's also a principle of governance, and it gets copycat and copied by a lot of political organization and states all over the world. It happened for the GDPR. If you look at what's happening now around the GDPR, most of the standards, even though they're local, they've been adapted and transformed based on the GDPR. And though the results were not so pregnant about the AI Act, it's very limited for now because it's still discussed and it's still very recent. Well, it's starting to make some also, how can I say, subsidiaries. And this way of looking AI as a risk is getting more and more interest. Why? Because behind risk, you've got insurance. So you've got the capacity to protect yourself if in case of any kind of issues and problem using AI, which is something that you less have in the more liberal vision of implementing those kind of things. In a way, if you center your strategy around what is called human agency, I think that you've heard about human-centric AI, which is the same, and the fundamental rights, well, you do have some sort of, how can I say that simply, insurance that you won't deploy something that is in the end going to generate some litigation. And it's not at all the way it's seen in the US. So the other things that you're going to tell me, and everybody says so, and we heard some very famous person saying, well, because you were focusing on risk, you were destroying innovation. Well, it's not true, simply factually not true. I know it's something that you've heard, and it's being said again and again by a number of policymakers, and also you heard that in the media, but it's simply not true. And we do have a precedent to say it is not true, which is simply the GDPR. it's funny because before the GDPR, you have this famous academic called Zarsky in 2017 said, well, the GDPR is going to be completely incompatible with the age of big data. It's going to destroy innovation and data-based innovation in Europe. Well, simply was not true, because in a further research, Larsen and Heinz, they said, well, no, what happened is that it enhanced innovation, it enhances the capacity to have some good research, because simply behind good regulation and behind a clear regulatory framework and nothing that moves all over the time, well, you're creating trust. And if you have trust, you have the capacity to have investors saying, I know that the way I invest or the way I do things are not going to move and change every 2 weeks. So they maybe and it's true that valuation are less interesting in Europe, but this is another topic. But it's also true that because when you have trust, when you have stability, when you have regulatory stability, it's better to invest in the end, because even if you're not going to get to have the moonshine money, you will have a lot of money, even though. Or if you prefer, better and a lot of return on investment. And well, this is has a name. It's called the transparency paradox, if you want to go further into this concept. So this being said, which is sort of an introduction, what do we address when we address risk using the Act? We address 3 types of risk, and those you need to really remember them. Fundamental rights and discrimination. This means inclusion and those kind of things, but it's not always what you think about discrimination. It might not be race-centered or gender-centered. This is not it's not the fundamental issue, because those are known topics. But for example, when you talk about inclusion using AI, you might have, I will give you an example about India in 2 minutes. You might have people with disabilities and that are not understood by the AI models, simply because the AI models are not trained using the knowledge and the backups of those people. So I'm going to give you an example in India in 2 minutes. You have manipulation and autonomy, of course, and you have safety and security, which is central, cybersecurity, and all those kind of things. Fundamental rights and discrimination. Well, it's a way to have AI being more pregnant as testing bias and including human oversight. I promised this little Indian approach. I've been working on an evaluation, and we were working on an AI system that would help people having hearing impairments to learn to sign, the hand sign and those kind of things. And what happened during this presentation and this evaluation was that we discovered, and it was not at all foreseen by the people doing this system, that you had different way of signing according to the place you live. And we had a community return saying to us, well, the problem is that you're signing like people from the cities. You're not signing the way we do sign in the rural areas. And this is quite interesting, because the AI was absolutely trained on those urban way of signing. And so most of the people could not use it because they didn't understood what was said. This is an example, but you have a vast number of it. So you really need to remember that it's not only about what we see about inclusion and discrimination, it's also about what we don't see. And in the end, for this very specific section, what happened is that they realized that they had to look at 18 more issues than the one they had spotted at the beginning. So really think in depth, because when you have an AI, if you know what AI is an algorithm with data that is trained using data. So hopefully the data is of good quality. If it's not, it's a problem. And a number of time, which is called epochs. It's the data is passed a number of times through this algorithm to get the planned issue. AI is as simple as this. Now, if you do have question about what is AI, I've got a very nice LinkedIn thread that is going to provide you with the question. It's only 60 seconds, so you won't get bored. The second element is manipulation and autonomy. So what they want to avoid in AI is there's this fantasy about subliminal techniques. They want to preserve human autonomy and preserve human authority against the human-centric approach. And I believe that you've all heard about the media. So in the media, what's happening about people committing suicide after listening to the AI. What is it? The point is exactly this one: the level of influence that those kind of electronic devices or data-centric devices have on the human persona and human people. And finally, but I'm not going to go into detail, which is safety and security, which is, of course, data security, cybersecurity, and those kind of things. Now, you're going to tell me, okay, now, I mean, you've been saying that it's not when you deploy those kind of risk-based approach, well, the return on investment are not so nice. Well, it's not they're not so nice, and they're not moonshine. Why? Because you have a the different type of investment and the way investment are done in Europe are very different, and the return of investment are very different than the way it's done in the US. It's as simple as that. So the evaluation are very different. So it's not linked to AI. It's linked on an investment practice. And of course, this would be nice to change. If trust was taken into account, you might have better return on investment. Now, in the other end, what is you might have an economic argument for responsible AI. And one is quite interesting nowadays because you have this big discussion about juniors not getting jobs and all those kind of things. And there's been a lot of research on those kind of things. I say Moglu, Restrepo, and all those kind of things. As they said, well, if you regulate, you have less impact on the job market than if you don't regulate. So this emphasis on human in the loop is also good for general societal protection. That will ensure, in a way, some sort of AI alignment instead of replacing human capabilities. And another interesting thing is that what we've discovered is that the productivity enhancement are not so good, because productivity using AI or productivity enhancement, using AI is 1.4%, which is not massive. And again, you have very AI labor observatory at ILO, International Labour Organization. It's online. I will give you the access in the end. And also, there's been this very, very interesting about McAfee. It's a book called The Second Machine Age. And what they've discovered is that the organization that adequately implement AI are the ones that invest not only in AI, but also in institution and regulation and governance. So for companies, if you want to get some return on investment on AI, well, you better have a couple, not only the plain investment on the processes or on the technical aspect, but also some sort of compliance and governance deployment. In the end, what Europe is saying is, and what Europe is implementing, is what is called regulatory diplomacy. So you, again, if you have high standards, then you can influence global norms. And in a way, how Europe wants is to preserve democratic governance in the face of technological change. So it might be of interest, might not be of interest. You are here to judge in a way, but in the end, that's what the question is. Do you want to implement something which is a reference, or do you say, well, the market is open and let the biggest and smartest and most powerful win? What Europe is saying is the European vision is built on 3 key principles that you need to remember. The first one is proportionality. The regulation must match the level of risk, not overestimate, but simply be proportional to the level of risk, which is exactly what you've got in the AI Act with those 4 levels of risk. Second, you must have what is called adaptability. you need to evolve with technology. And it's absolutely paramount because, for example, if you do not evolve with technology, in the end, the technology, which is always in advance and forward regulation, you will absolutely take the game, and the regulation will be completely not adapted. Which it happened with the GDPR. The previous regulation was more than 10 years before, more than 20 years, as a matter of fact, before it was redone. And the problem is that in the end, in the last year of the implementation of this previous regulation, it was absolutely obsolete. So a lot of things happened that were not supposed to happen. Then the first thing, of course, is inclusivity, but not only about those principles that we talked before. It's more about all the stakeholders must participate, which is you as students, or everybody, or us as researchers. Everybody need to be inclusive and work inclusively to the decision about AI, and also about shaping the future of AI and AI use. It's exactly what happened in what's happening with the international organization. You have a lot of expertise, a lot of discussion, a lot of collaborative work, and OECD implemented also a vast number of regulation and collaborative work. And you need, if you want to you can get access to those publications, and it's very important to be aware of those, because they're providing a lot of very good governance and very good, very interesting elements about the way you need to think about and with AI. I'm going to conclude. I hope I was not too quick. In a way, if we talk about Europe, Europe has this ambition of deploying democracy by design in the age of AI. So again, as a sort of a reminder, Europe wants has this risk-centered approach, and it wants this to be a standard and a model for the rest of the world. I don't know if it's over ambitious, but then what they say and what we say as European is that, of course, it might seem a bit contingent. It might seem something that is a bit difficult to implement, but the question is, and this is going to be for you to think, can we afford to not regulate? And maybe this is the question we should ask to the US. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Caroline. I think there's several questions, so perhaps you can answer those, and then I'll give the US approach, and then we can answer questions together. So there's a question for you in the Q&A.
You said human in the loop for economic reason. What is the argument for supporting the current economic model or capitalism? Well, it's quite interesting because it's not about capitalism. There's no difference between the way the economic models that you do have, or the main economics models that you do have in Europe and in the US. It's not, again, I mean, it's funny because this vision of the invisible hand and self-regulation saying to be capitalism, and the other, which is more state-centered. Well, as a matter of fact, if you talk about something which is state-centered, it's the China way of seeing AI. It's not at all the European way of seeing AI. So we're both in a capitalist model. Maybe we're more, how can I say, Max Hurston, which is more the sort of Protestant way of seeing AI, which is weird because we're European, but anyway. The point is that it's not about somebody being capitalist and another not being the capitalist. It's about two visions of capitalism, one with less interest for risk than the other. And this is, we are both looking for revenue. We are both looking for return on investment. We don't have any kind of difference on this point, but the way we're doing it, the pathway to return on investment is different.
Thank you. Any other questions for Caroline?
I think something that was said earlier was the economic gain for productivity was around 1.4% or 4%. I'm not sure about the...
Yeah, 1.4%, yeah, globally.
Okay. But then is it worth creating this much amount of regulations when you compare like the economic gain is just 1.4%? Because putting a lot of regulations is also, you know,
Well, the point is
Cost.
that it's not about product. When you measure productivity, you measure gain or resource used as per unit of work, and the way you gain some unit of work using the same volume of resource, to make things simple, because it's really vulgarization about productivity here. But the point is that when you look at the business life cycle of the way you create production, what you realize is that sometimes you might use AI and it will create some gain, and sometimes you might not use AI because AI will not create some gain. The problem is that you have difficulties knowing when AI is going to generate some gains or not. You need a number of information about the business life cycle. You need that you don't have nowadays. So what the companies have a tendency to do, they make some experiments, or they go and they invest, and then they realize that the return on investment is not so good. And why is it not so good? Simply because, for example, if you use large LLMs, well, the LLMs, they are not trained for your business model. They are very general. And then they are producing returns and results that are very general and not usable in their own specific context. In a way, if you're using an LLM in order to produce your research paper, everybody does that as a student. Well, what the point is that if you're not very precise, and I see some of you smiling, it's absolutely normal, and you're right to use it, but you need to be very specific and very precise, simply because the LLMs, the general LLMs, they are not trained to do any kind of efforts on economics or any focus on economics. They're trained to give general answer. So if your question is not sufficiently specific, you will get a general answer, which is something that everybody will get. And you won't get quality, you won't get granularity, you won't get the efficiency that you might get using those kind of tools, or the quickness that you might get using those kind of tools. And this is absolutely central, because what's happening what has been seen, and you have this very interesting paper at ILO saying, well, I don't know if you heard about work slope and those kind of things, which is the fact that they're saying, well, we know that people are using AI because in the results, you don't have any kind of creative thinking, you don't have any kind of creative design, you don't have any kind of specificity or added value that you might have in a 100% human-centric approach. So AI is very nice because AI will quicken your outputs, provided that in the AI process that you use, you bring your value added, you bring your human-centric approach, meaning that you're not generalist and you are specific with your own specific vision. The question we had about capitalism earlier is quite interesting, because there is a bias saying, well, Europe is socialist and the US is capitalist, which is not the fact. We're both capitalist, as a matter of fact. If we were not capitalist, the social structure will not be the same, meaning that everything would be owned by the state or those kind of vision, but it's more complex than that. So anyhow, bring your value added. The only way to have a real result is to bring in your capacity, your intelligence, and your value added, your differences in a way. And for companies, the same. Because if you think that everybody produces the same way, well, you're wrong. I will give you another example, which is a study I've done with a colleague about chocolates. And if they are here, they will remember this. And a very interesting aspect is that if you look at the state of the art, originally the chocolate company, they were using grounders, and they were using tools in order to cook the beans that were originally deployed for coffee. Of course, there's big differences and no common aspect, except the fact that they need to be cooked. But the coffee beans and cocoa beans are very different, and the outputs are very different. So by using those because they said, well, after all, it's only cooking things, they thought that it would be the same, but in the end the process was not good, so they needed to amend it and modify and in the end develop specific machines for cocoa beans. And so those are the kind of things. And when you add AI on this, you might need AI to measure some things in the cocoa bean, and you might need AI measuring something else in the coffee beans. And every kind of roasting and coffee beans are different. So you need also, when you look at the processes and where AI can be used, you need to perfectly know your production process. You need to perfectly know where you're going to, where AI is going to be helpful, and where AI is not going to be helpful.
Thank you, Caroline. Perhaps you could answer Marilyn's questions. Then I have a quick question, and I'll go ahead and give a US point of view. My quick question is if you have any comments or an overview of Mistral AI, the French developed large language model.
Yeah, well, it's not my guidelines. It's European guidelines anyway. Well, will it be better than today? Hopefully. Less silo, clearly, because you need to know a lot of, again, if you focus on creativity, if you focus on granularity, it's true that silos are going to be, well, less pregnant than they were. What has been seen, I'm talking about what has been seen on GDPR, is that what happened about data is that you have more integration, more interaction between different types of professionals, and also well, large innovation processes and a very, very large amount of creativity. Because if you want to go on top of silos, then you will need to be creative, because the silos are very strong, because they've been existing for ages. So what was done for GDPR is that in the end, the silos, the existing silos, for example, of different type of data professional, had to explode in order to deploy something that was new. It's very Schumpeterian. What's happening with AI is very Schumpeterian. We're clearly in creative destruction, because we see clearly that a lot of the pre-existing topics and the pre-existing elements are disappearing in order to create something that is brand new. So we are living live a Schumpeterian experience, which is quite nice. It's okay.
Thank you. And then can you comment or provide a little bit of background on Mistral AI, the French LLM?
Mistral, yes. Well, in a way, when we are talking about French, well, sovereignty, something which is local centered or not local centered. Well, so sovereignty is about the way you consider data, and it's about where you're going to locate the data. So it's not about the algorithm, I believe. It's maybe in the algorithm you have some sort of specific design in order to take into account what we've talked about, human-centric and all those kind of things. Mistral is originally French-centered, that is opening. And the point about, again, we talk about capitalism, the point about capital is international. So, of course, you might have a design which is human-centric. You might have a way of structuring data which is preserving data protection and privacy. So that's why what is considered as sovereign. But the location or the capital structure is by nature international. And it's not an inconsistency to have design, which is human-centric, a structure which is respecting, or data structure which is respecting GDPR and privacy, and then investments that might come from other horizons. This very famous Vespasian emperor saying, money has no smell. Well, the point is that, of course, you do have this, the money is coming from all over the place anyway, but the way you build the structure is very different, and the way you build your originality or the originality of your product is very different than, or might be very different when you have, though you might have some investors from all over the place. I can give you an example which is quite funny, which is in the wine industry. In the wine industry, you have investors from all over all over the world. It's not because you have investors of all over the world that that your wine in the end is going to be something that is only for the people, for the public that is behind those investors. You're not going, those big Bordeaux castle, they are not producing wine for their specific type of customers. They're just producing something which is considered very good and very high quality, and it sells. And when you try to influence winemakers, usually it fails. So that way, it's not because you do have in AI some different type of investment that it will destroy the sovereignty of the AI, which is again human-centric and data respecting a number of criterions.
So I wanted to give a little bit of background on the U.S. approach to regulation of AI, and with the background that I actually think that to date, the evolution has been quite similar to cybersecurity regulation, with the proviso that the path has been somewhat different. So I think where we are is similar, but there have been many initiatives that have been started both in the federal government and at the state government levels, much proposed legislation which hasn't been adopted, which would have made it quite different than cybersecurity. So the U.S. approach with the current Trump administration is risk management and a national security focus, also balancing some of the considerations of innovation and safety. And the way we're doing it is utilizing executive orders, the framework of existing law, which I'll touch on in a minute, in combination with federal sector initiatives, U.S. government procurement, which drives innovation to quite a large degree in the U.S., state laws and industry standards. Back when the internet was in the mid to late 90s, there were similar questions on regulation and how to regulate the internet. And two friends wrote the first internet law book, The Law of the Internet, and their point of view was that existing laws were in place that would cover most of the issues related to the internet, for example, with defamation and intellectual property, and that there would just be an extension of laws or an adaptation to the new circumstances. And so that's, for the most part, how we've regulated the internet. It's, for the most part, how we've approached cybersecurity, and to date, it's how we're approaching AI. The White House executive order, the Trump administration, is quite different than the Biden administration executive order. The Biden administration executive order had more of a risk management focus, and it was actually quite an interesting initiative. Executive orders primarily apply to executive branch, but their view was to extend it somewhat further into the private sector and public. The new Trump administration one has three pillars: one, focusing on innovation. This is the table of contents. A second on AI infrastructure, and a third on security and international diplomacy. Oriented for the most part towards maintaining or developing U.S. leadership in the area, with the premise that AI is such a transformative technology that it's an imperative for the United States and the U.S. allies to have leadership in the field. And these initiatives here through the table of contents, both focusing on innovation and scientific investment, open source, building infrastructure, and national security are oriented towards that. US too has this risk management framework orientation, but voluntary. Similar to the cybersecurity risk management framework, there's an AI risk management framework, has somewhat similar risk categories to the EU Act, but again, voluntary, and this oriented towards the federal government, but as with the cybersecurity framework being adopted in the private sector at universities. U.S. government agencies play a very large role in our approach to AI, as with cybersecurity. And so since we have a decentralized approach to technology regulation in general and a decentralized approach to AI regulation, industry-specific initiatives play a very key part. Some of them are directed regulations. Some of them are more oriented towards enforcement based upon existing laws. Here's three, and then we'll discuss the FDA on the next slide. The SEC has the view, and it's been borne out that AI really lowers the bar towards committing financial fraud. Financial fraud much more accessible or reachable for those with limited skills or limited fraud-related skills. And so the Securities and Exchange Commission established an emerging and cyber tech group, primarily focused on AI, to try to get ahead of the fraud, the increasing risk of securities fraud. One of the areas which is in conjunction with the FTC is not the type of fraud where someone is actually trying to con someone or doing something with software, but it's over publicizing or over saying what their companies are doing with AI. So the SEC really policing what companies say they're doing with AI. There's been a number of boards and board level actions on that, and a number of initiatives to try to require boards to put in their proxy statements what they're doing, what the companies are doing with AI. So again, towards transparency and committing fraud. The FTC is one of our major regulators and most important for cybersecurity. And it's essentially based upon this Section 5 of the Federal Trade Commission Act, unfair, deceptive practices or trade practices affecting commerce. One of the first cases or actions with this was Wyndham Worldwide, the hotel firm that the FTC brought an action against, and ultimately a court suit. And so the FTC's view is that companies are promoting themselves as having industry best practices in cybersecurity. And when they don't, that they're violating a section of the Federal Trade Commission Act and not presenting themselves accurately to the public. FTC also having an increasing role with what companies are saying about their use of AI, and going to see an increasing number of actions under this Section 5. And then a little bit longer ago, FCC and regulating generated voices, and we'll see this again. One of the more interesting areas, I think, is the Food and Drug Administration. So this is really quite specialized as far as approving medical devices and new pharmaceuticals, but also AI applications. And it's somewhat of a struggle, and it's a new world for the FDA as it is for all pharmaceutical and medical device regulators worldwide. So historically, very risk-oriented in categorizing medical devices by risk. The approach with AI is a little bit different and a new type of categorization. Of course, risk is important, but what the AI is doing. So some of the things AI does, such as informational, considered low risk from a medical standpoint, and then others, such as diagnosis and treatment recommendations, much more high risk. This diabetic retinopathy AI solution from University of Iowa, through a company spun out from University of Iowa, is the first approved in the US from a number of years ago and had several interesting characteristics. So the background is that diabetes patients are at risk, some more than others, of diabetic retinopathy and subsequent blindness, or some that the disease progresses to that. And the recommendation is to have a eye exam yearly for diabetes patients. Many don't, and because of that have risk of contracting and also progressing of diabetic retinopathy. So the idea of the solution was to provide a service in the internist office of the general practitioner, where a diabetes patient who does go, for the most part, to their general practitioner once a year, would look into a device, that their eye scans would be transmitted up to this company. They have thousands and thousands of images that they've trained on, and they would give a risk assessment as to whether the patient was at risk of diabetic retinopathy, and if they were, refer them to a specialist. And so the characteristics of this, then, it's not diagnosing anything, it's not providing a treatment recommendation, it's providing screenings to people at risk who may not be may not have the screenings elsewhere. And so this has been the type of solution that, for the most part, the FDA has approved so far with AI. Another characteristic of all the ones that the FDA has approved is that they're locked. The data that the AI is trained on, when the FDA approves it, it's locked at that point. And if the company continues to train their model, they have to go back to the FDA and apply for a reapproval or a reevaluation. It's almost the same as if you change out the power supply on a medical device, you need to go back to the FDA. So these types of industry-specific regulations and guidelines developing across U.S. industries, so not just through these overarching agencies such as FTC and DOJ, but specific ones such as FDA, see increasing approaches through the water regulators, which are both the health regulators as well as the EPA, also Department of Energy. So really, really quite important and in line with how we've regulated technology previously. The states, too, have a very, very large role. Some of the discussion has been that in the absence of a national law, AI Act, there's been quite a few proposals, but none that have been adopted, that the states are stepping in, but this is really consistent with our technology regulatory history. There's been a shift, though, in the last year or so. Early regulation and laws at the state and indeed at the city level have been oriented towards bias and privacy and consumer protection. And that's true, for example, with the New York City local law, which relates to AI systems that are being used in employment decisions, such as screening of resumes or actual hiring decisions, that those companies utilizing those will have to have an audit of the AI once a year. And so just getting into the early rounds of these types of audits. So again, the type of AI that's considered risky from the perspective that it deals with people and cities and state governments stepping in. The categorization that the federal government is doing and has been doing on AI systems that are being used in the federal government agencies, they demark or note which ones of those have potential human impact, such as unemployment decisions. The Tennessee one I think is neat just because it's state-specific interest, but broader than that. This is actually a national interest now. Use of synthetic voices that mirror an actual person. This act here is nicknamed the Elvis Act. So banning the use of AI for name, image, and likeness. And you see a number of recent court cases that relate to this. The newer state legislation is really quite different, and it has to do with catastrophic risk caused by the very largest language models. And one was quite interesting from last year. It was called the Safe and Secure Innovation for Frontier Artificial Intelligence Systems Act. And it was actually applied to the very, very largest large language models, those that had over $100 million in investment, and placed on them quite a large number of transparency requirements, reporting requirements into the state government. And it was debated quite heavily, both at the legislature level, but also in the public and with the largest LLM companies. Partially, I think Governor Newsom put out an interesting statement and vetoing it. Not that he disagreed with the risk or the need for a risk management approach on these LLMs, but I think more on the specifics of the legislation that made it at risk of becoming obsolete quickly, including how it defined what frontier models were or large language models. And indeed, this issue of what's the definition of AI, I think, pervades quite a lot of AI regulation and proposed AI regulation. And then this New York one is kind of a derivation, I think, of the California one, which is vetoed. This has been passed by the full legislature, and it's with Governor Hochul. So again, it's on frontier models, trying to legislate or regulate and mitigate the risk of a catastrophe from these types of models, and requiring safety and security protocols and plans, incident reporting within 72 hours, annual reviews, and prohibiting the provisioning of these large language models where there's a large scale or systemic risk. So in some ways, quite similar to the high risk category of the European Union. And then to wrap up then, as to how the US system works or has worked. So we have this decentralized approach with industry-specific regulation, some perhaps, although not yet, national regulation at some point, and a patchwork of states. Pretty much all the states now have privacy regulation. But the courts are also very, very active, and the courts are playing a major role in intellectual property, but on two sides. So this was 3 years ago or so, 4 years ago, a digital art competition in Colorado, which was won by Jason Allen, who utilized AI, Midjourney, to develop this image. So it was quite controversial from the standpoint of the other artists, but he won and applied for a copyright from the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. They turned him down, saying that there wasn't any creativity used in this, and it was an AI. He argued that the prompting that he used, over 1,000 prompts, and then tailored it in Photoshop at the end, indicated human creativity, but the Patent and Trademarks Office position still is that this isn't art and is not copyrightable. So there's an impact on artists, Jason Allen, but also an impact, very large impact on the use of copyrighted works in the training of AI. And so that is being resolved to date through the court system, and the artists and the authors having quite an increasing amount of success through the court system, where the courts are saying that the large language models have either improperly used their works, or have gotten their works through pirated sites, and are liable back to the artist. So I think ultimately we'll have a system maybe similar to the music system here, where artists will be reimbursed, but at the moment quite a lot happening through the courts. So with that, I'd like to wrap up and thank Carolyn and Pierre and Catherine and Hachmi, and see if there's any questions for Carolyn or in the US.
I've got a very interesting question is in the chat, which is how do regulatory bodies handle the stacking of AI agents, which is really the sense, because of course we are seeing more and more of professional or field specific agent merging. Well, the point is that again, in Europe, I believe that this is resolved by the AI Act. And if there is a risk which is generated by those stacking or merging agents, then if, for example, an agent doesn't have any kind of risk, or is considered minimal risk, and then if you put another agent on top of it, it generates risk, that it will be taken care of by the Act. Something very interesting about what Jean-Pierre said is that, well, in the US, because of the type of law, which is you're on the common law, we are on the civil law, meaning that in the common law system, do you have well, the law is what is central is the judge vision. In the civil law system, which is ours, all laws are written, and all laws being written, it's the way the judge has no interpretation for the law. The judge is just supposed to read and say the law, He cannot interpret. You cannot have any kind of vision, personal vision, because the way he's supposed to see is also in the code. And maybe the difference of interpretation that we do have towards AI and towards risk is also or originates maybe of the way we see the legal framework. You do have in the United States, and you just said it. It's a way it's being settled in the court. So the question is asked to the judge, and it's being settled in the court. Well, this is not possible in Europe in civil law system. In civil law system, the issues must be taken care of by the law, and the judge talk about compliance. You compliance or not? The judge don't have any way of deciding the change in the legal system. It's only the parliament that can do that, or either the European Parliament or national parliaments or the Council of Ministers that have the power between the trilateral. I'm not going to go into the details of European legislation because it's a nightmare, but first it starts with the trilateral, and then you need to have consensus, then you have a vote from the parliament. But anyway, in our system, law being written, the judge cannot have any kind of interpretation. The way he's supposed to interpret is in the law. So he can only say, well, you are compliant or you're not compliant. Whereas, as you say, you ask the question of, is this of settlement in the US, which cannot be asked in our legal system. So potentially, maybe the difference in treatment about AI has its ground in and its origin in the way we see law and the way we consider the legal system. It's a question.
I think it's an interesting point. It also relates to the relationship of technology and technology innovation and law, because it's close to impossible or very difficult to predict the ramifications of technology and technology innovation. And so as it's difficult to predict, it would be difficult to write laws in advance or to pass laws in advance or pass laws that cover all of the ramifications and permutations. And that's why I think the U.S. courts are stepping in where there are gaps and where the legislation and the law hasn't kept up with some of the technology change.
Yeah. So again, it's the difference of vision and legal framework or legal ecosystem. Yeah, it's true. It's an interesting pathway. There is in the question how AI could be used for classical or quantum cryptography. Well, do you have 24 hours? Because seriously, this cannot be answered. This cannot be answered in 2 minutes. We can have a chat if you want. The point is that yes, well, it's not only AI. It's a vast number of applications, and the point is that what's happening with quantum. Well, we are coming from a statistical based world. What's happening with quantum is that we are switching to probabilistic world. And this opens massive technological and ethical question. So we can have a discussion, but of course, the short question is of course.
Yeah, a couple of points on the AI agent question. What are the differences of our regulation of the financial sector, the banking regulation? Is that part of the regulation is on the people and the people running the banks, and that's part of the risk of the shadow banking system or the banking system that's outside of regulation, including with cryptocurrencies. And I think there's that type of risk here too. So if AI really has a potential for catastrophic risk, not everyone and not all the managers of the companies are scrupulous, and so there could or should be a step where the people are regulated too. And I think our system, the U.S. system, has had a flaw, not in product liability in general, but a flaw in software liability. So a lot of the software, most of the software is great. Some of the software is not great. some of the companies cut corners on the software in order to get the products out to market. And so that may or may not be okay in the software world, but in the AI world, it may be somewhat different depending on someone's view of the trajectory of AI development. So I think it's something to think about it as the AI evolves. On the agents, I actually think that the risk is somewhat unknowable at this point, and it's unmeasured. And the White House view from their executive order also is that we need to really ramp up the research and the monitoring and the understanding and the reporting on AI risks. And the agent risk is that it's multi-platform. They operate with objective functions to maximize objective functions. And there's a number of instances where I think there's more than a number where in order to maximize the objective function, that the AI operates outside of the guardrails which have been set by the developer. And so with these then, it's difficult for companies to put bounds on them. Since many of these AI agents are part of larger procurements and part of larger systems, I don't think in some cases that the procurement systems, certainly of smaller and mid-sized companies, and probably the federal government too, is kept up with AI agent procurement, especially when there's embedded agents in larger systems. And so it's for our whole system at the procurement level, the legislation, the governance and leadership, there's a lot of new challenges which are somewhat difficult because of the technology development pace.
Definitely. By the way, it has nothing to do with what you just said. I do have slides in French and in English, so I can share it. And I do have the seminal sources and bibliographic sources, recent bibliographic sources to share also. So, but it cannot be shared here. So I don't know how, if you have a place where I can send all those information so that the different participant could use those different resources. Parenthesis is closed.
I have two amateurish questions. The first one, this proliferation of regulations, too much laws, whether in the United States with its decentralized landscape or with its centralized landscape in Europe. This proliferation of laws, doesn't it create a difficulty to apply these laws in a way that it's a little bit like the bootleggers and the Baptists? So too much laws that you cannot apply because they are too difficult to incorporate in your system, in the administrative system, in the judicial system. So too much laws too fast are very difficult to absorb in the system, as if you don't have laws. So a little bit the bootleggers and the Baptists. This is on one side. On the second side, we talk about legislation that promotes innovation. I wonder, is it legislation that drives innovation or lack thereof, or is it subsidies that drive innovation better?
That's a good question. Jean-Pierre, I can answer you as you wish.
I think, well, overall, it's an innovation system that countries and regions have. So that the connections between universities and private sector and federal government and the progression from basic research into applied research and then pilots and trials and companies and bringing products to the marketplace. So the government plays a very large role. Here in the U.S., it's through the research grant funding, through organizations like National Science Foundation and DARPA. It's through the procurement of the federal government and the Department of Defense. It's through programs like the Small Business Innovation Research Grant. And then the overall system is enabled by some legislation, including the Bayh-Dole Act from the early 80s, which provided a financial incentive to universities for not just doing the research, but spinning it out and commercializing it. So it's the full system, and all of that together is what leads to innovation. Of course, the venture capital aspect too, and the financing.
In order to answer, if I may, the first question about too much law kills law anyway, the point is that in Europe, you don't have too much law. The issue is that when you have this massive federal organization with federal and local and different type of local government and different circuits, it might seem a bit massive, but I believe that, well, the US have been working on this for at least 2 centuries and they're still alive, so it's not an issue. But the point is that in Europe, the law is quite simple. The law, the applicable law, is the law that is best suited for the citizen. And I think if you want to remember something about European law, just remember Article 5 of the treaty. Why? Article 5 says, concerning conflicts of the law, because what you're talking about is conflicts of law, concerning conflicts of law, the European laws apply if and only they are more favorable to the citizen than the national law. So it's quite simple. You have a European framework. Some European framework are directly applicable. Some European framework needs adaptation, transposition, as they say. And those transposition, they're done by the parliament. They're voted by the parliament. And in the end, this transposition, becomes national law. If European law is better than this transposition, so more favorable to the citizen, then the European law applies. Article 5. If it's less favorable, then it's the local law that is going to be applied. So it's not both law that applies. It's either the one, either one or the other, the one that is most favorable to the citizen. And then you don't have much law because you have either the local law or you have European law, but it's not everything applicable at the same time. Though we know that in the constitutional point of view, the European law is the better, well, it's considered superior because it's a treaty than the national law that is in France. But of course, you have differences according to the 27 members, and you have countries that are not members also in Europe. So that's the first aspect. It's not going to kill. I mean, the AI Act is not going to kill. To create overkills as compared to other types of local law. That's the first point. And I would like to answer what Catherine said, and she's absolutely right. The truth about AI is that in the end, and Jean-Pierre said it also, we need to try to reconcile, because it's something that is going to be a real change. It is a game changer, and we cannot continue fighting our traditional fights with those kind of game changers. And when Jean-Pierre said, as an introduction, we are roughly at the same place, he's absolutely right. The way we do it is different. We're exactly at the same place. In the end, we want to tackle risk, and we want to tackle all issues that might create harm because of risk. Am I wrong?
Never.
Come on. So that is for Jean-Pierre, I believe.
On Alan's question on jurisdictions, which is a really interesting question, and for US there's differences in jurisdictional approach with the internet because of the change of how business is done, but in many ways it's existing law and approaches here. I think for businesses it varies from country to country as to whether jurisdiction is by having a local presence or having a sale or a customer. And the very large multinationals, it's a great challenge for them, and it comes into play in a number of ways. The question for a multinational is how do you actually approach varying laws from your jurisdiction to jurisdiction? In one area where it's really quite important is the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, and what many companies actually do is they take the approach in all countries based upon the legislation or the jurisdiction where the legislation is the most rigorous. And so that is one approach as to the way to lessen the risk. I think what's had a and the companies are very good at navigating this. I think what's had a much larger impact is that criminals can now be in another jurisdiction more easily, and the reach is limited or can be extremely limited, both in the arrest and prosecution of them. Some of the possible technology penalties on more recent European Union legislation for the large tech companies is a percentage of worldwide revenue or profit, and what's the philosophy or on that as compared to having a metric of percentage of European revenue or profit?
Well, the point is that there's been a big discussion about the origins of the profits. During the privacy, when you had only the Privacy Act, what was happening is that it was originally on the European-based revenues. And they managed to put the revenues with kumkums and with a number of way of doing things. They managed to get the revenues from Europe out of Europe. That was so in the end, what the Europeans said, either you have the capacity to keep the revenue in Europe, but then if you keep the revenue in Europe, it's okay, it's a percentage of your European revenue, but because of taxation issues, they were bringing the revenues out of Europe. So in the end, it was not possible to know the origin of the revenue. So it's because of tax optimization that it's worldwide. If you had no tax optimization, then you had the European revenue and it was okay. But it's because of consolidation and tax optimization that you have this question. The philosophy is revenue and taxation based.
Oh, thank you. Pierre, perhaps one or two more questions from your class or from others, and then we'll have closing comments. And Hachmi and Pierre could wrap up if you'd like.
Yeah, just one question. Where can I put the slides? Because I don't have the possibility to do it here.
Oh, you can send them to me, and Sam and I,
Okay.
Sam and I can send them to everyone.
Okay, good. Splendid.
From the class perspective, I think they are saturated with data. So we have quite a good discussion to have right after this. We conclude this webinar. We have quite a good discussion to have in class. So for the time being, no questions. But if I have anything that is very pertinent, I will send them by mail. Definitely very interesting discussion, and we'll have things to say about it in the future.
Thank you, Pierre, and thank you everyone for joining. And as Catherine notes, the really is a discussion on the differences between civil and common law. So Pierre, if you'd like, Carolyn, and then Pierre, if you'd like to wrap up, please.
Yeah, again, we had I had this little comment on this. So thank you for having me, and it's very, very interesting and very nice to all, and always fascinating to compare the way that are done on both sides of the Atlantic, the way things are done, sorry, in both sides of the Atlantic. But what I believe as a wrap up is that we are not so far apart. So not being so far apart, it could be interesting to think together and deploy something that is applicable all over the place, because AI requires a lot of investment. AI requires a lot of very good data. AI requires a lot of, well, in a way, some sort of being solid on a large number of things. And I believe that it's better to put, I mean, what's happening geopolitically in the world means that it would be better to have a common ground on those kind of issues than to continue doing things apart as we are now. We're not so far away, we're not so far apart. So, well, and it's sort of a best of, well, maybe wishful thinking, but we could gain everything if we started to work together on this point and stop fighting each other, because we've been allies for ages. We should continue to be allies, though we might have some economic differences or legal differences. We should continue being allied on the AI ground.
Thank you, Caroline and Pierre.
Well, as we say, we live across the pond. So technology had transformed the ocean into a pond. a small pond where we can communicate, and this is a perfect example of how we can communicate across the Atlantic. Thank you very much. This is our first experience, George Mason University and INSEEC Grande École. The first of many, I hope. Several will be dedicated to researchers, several will be dedicated to the general public and students, and we will be happy to receive at our premises Jean-Pierre Offray. He will come to Paris in April. I hope you will bring some friends from across the pond with you. Anyway, thank you very much. It was a very interesting discussion and looking forward to the next one. Thank you, Catherine and Hashmi, for allowing this to happen. Thank you, Caroline, for your engagement, and Jean-Pierre and Ivan, thank you very much, and all the attendants from across the Atlantic. Thank you.
Thank you, Pierre. Thank you, Caroline, Catherine, and Hashmi. Bye. Thank you. And thank you for
very much for
everyone who
everything.
joined.
Yeah, thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.